So the first time that I actually realized that I was different, I think I was about 5 or 6. My mom told me that I came back from kindy. And so I came back and I just, put my bag away and then went to the mirror to look.
My eyes are wide open. I see you clear.
Questions start coming into my head, So what happened to me? Why am I like this? Why am I different?
Touch the same floor. Our world has been
Established in 1984, Craniofacial Australia is a not-for-profit charitable foundation that was founded by South Australian of the Decade, Professor David AC.
Probably the best example that I can think of, a little boy who had a facial deformity, and he was in a village in a developing country. They didn't know what to do with him, and so he was tied up outside while everybody else went about their daily work. He had no language. He just used to grunt and make noises. Some people came upon him, and so they managed to bring him to Australia. And that young man underwent a series of the most complicated medical interventions and support, and ultimately he has a full and prosperous life.
The organisation's vision is to support patients through their journey, advance discovery into craniofacial care, and educate and train health professionals.
Human beings with these craniofacial deformities who have been considered to be worthless in the past, locked up in madhouses, now are shown to be highly intelligent, capable of having full and productive lives. And even if you are the sort of person who thinks only in terms of their economic excellence, then that checks out as well. They will produce more than they take.
How we support patients is really from the time of diagnosis. So when a child is born and there's an obvious deformity, that is a huge impact on the mother and the father and their family. They had such big dreams for their child, and then they get presented with an issue which they weren't expecting. So from that point onwards, it's a real battle for parents. And then over time, they need support to go to operations, they need support to go to appointments, they need support to travel to gain medical service.
The suture in Harvey's skull was fused too early, and that means that there's no room for the brain to grow. The night before the surgery really hit me, and I didn't get much sleep. I was questioning whether it was something that I had done through pregnancy that could have caused the issue. When I reached out to Craniofacial Australia and they sent through the care package, we got given a blanket that was stitched by people in South Australia that don't know my child. Like, there was toys, like there was a little t-shirt that says that he's a cranio warrior. So that was really nice and made us feel like the journey wasn't just our journey.
I lost count how many surgeries I had. I think it was around a dozen.
Hello.
Had I not had any of the surgeries, I wouldn't have been able to eat. Food wouldn't necessarily have gone down, and you could see all the way to the back of my throat. That would have made me feel ashamed, and I wouldn't have wanted to engage with the world.
Craniofacial Foundation has provided us some funding. What the funding has given us is the ability to employ people within the laboratory and also to buy in the resources that we need to perform the experiments on some of our model systems. We want to understand how disorders arise so that we can try and fix them. But even better for us would be to try and stop the disease before it arises. Right? So if we can get preventative medicines in place, that would be our major outcome.
In relation to children with craniofacial conditions, my research is about understanding how they're doing with their emotional well-being, and then of course working out what we should be doing to help people who have difficulties in those areas. I think parents really appreciate understanding more about what a craniofacial diagnosis means for their child's future.
Children with craniosynostosis could have various mutations. What this causes is an overgrowth of bone in the plates in the cranium. So what we're trying to do is shut that process down by inhibiting the bone forming process in these growth plates, and that allows the brain to grow naturally to its full potential. It's been quite exciting actually. The money that we've got from the Craniofacial Foundation and also from the NHMRC has allowed us to progress in this field, and we've been able to actually inhibit the fusion of the sutures. The research that we're doing is leading the field in this area, and hopefully we can either reduce the types of surgeries that are being done or eliminate those in the future.
Education is really needed in this work because of the very rare nature of the craniofacial deformity. A lot of this work was sorted out in the early 1960s. Professor David spoke of Paul Tessier. Then literally the next level would be Prof David, and he was one of the first to do this work within Australia. Now that knowledge and experience has been handed down, and it's important for us to continue that educational process because the outcomes for patients are much better.
We, for example, Zoom teaching to Indonesian surgeons, 215 of them, every week to support them in their education and in their patient management, giving them advice, etc. And those relationships produce wonderful outcomes.
We're so lucky here in Australia to be able to, have a foundation that does lead, craniofacial surgery and research and evidence-based, stuff all over the world. That message is being spread overseas, and all the young kids and the families overseas also get the amazing support that we have available to us here in Australia. It's really important because it literally changes lives.
These craniofacial surgeries are life-changing, and the main reason is that you take someone with significant deformity who has lost their confidence or have had people treat them in a different manner, then improving their appearance and improving the way their own self-perception is extremely important, and I think is life-changing.
Lift me up in your branches. We can watch the sunrise.
We continue to need public support. This is about a significant effort to make human beings who are afflicted with craniofacial deformity play their full role in our society.
For people who are thinking about supporting the foundation, I would say do it. The difference that it made to me could only happen because people donate. And so please do, please support them.
That's our story, and I think it leads in beautifully to Professor David's talk on the wonder of changing faces. Professor David.
Have you got your little tool? Thank you. Just a technical thing about the laser pointer, which I need. Thank you, sir. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you ever so much for coming along. So many old faces here, and you can't imagine what a thrill it is to see you What I'm going to do this evening is try and alter the format a little bit from the way in which I've done this before, namely go through time scale. We started here and we ended there. And I'm going to try and highlight a few things. The gaps can be filled by looking at the posters that are around the room, and I think is there going to be that little loop video at one stage or somewhere? Did we get to do that?
In the break.
Okay, in the break. So we'll. There's other stuff for you to look at, and in the meantime, I'm going to go through the journey from the beginning. A little bits of stuff for people who who've been here for a long time haven't seen before, so here we go. Those who have heard me talk before will understand that, and I've given this chat a long time, over many years, and that is that this started, the concept of this work started in the First World War. It started when people put up their heads in trenches and had their faces blown off. And up until that time you just died. Then along came some very advanced people. One of them, a man called Harold Gillies, and we'll talk about him in a minute. I suppose people in this room some people are old enough to know about Norman Lindsay, who used to produce the wonderfully risque paintings of all sorts of people, fairies indeed as well. And his brother was Darrell Lindsay, and Darrell Lindsay was the official wartime painter, artist, and he produced the pictures of these deformities that you can see. Now, Harold Gillies was a New Zealander. He was a bumptious registrar, very junior, and he was an opportunist. He saw the chance to go to the front and be famous, and he became famous. He became famous because the Allies won the war. He became the sort of father of British plastic surgery. But the most important person there, he was very junior. This man was South Australian. This man was Sir Henry Simpson Newland, who became one of the first presidents of the College of Surgeons. He was a general surgeon, a brain surgeon before there were specialties, and he was much more important than Gillies. But he came back to Adelaide. Gillies stayed in England and became an English gentleman, and as such went into the history books. Sir Henry Simpson Newland became very famous here, but not really internationally. But he was a great founder of this discipline. Brain surgery, facial surgery, fix these people up. And we have that connection in Adelaide, and some of these pictures, one of these nurses, where are we, was this, that's this one. One of the nurses here gave me that photograph of World War I victims from Keswick village, Keswick barracks, when after the First World War. She was one of the nurses. He was one of the victims, and she kept that under her pillow all her life. She was actually married to somebody else. And those days that was not to be mentioned, but on her deathbed she asked her daughter, who had worked for me, to please give me the picture and tell me the story, so I'm telling you. So fast forward to World War II, and Gillies was not doing so well. The bombers could come further into Britain than they could in the First World War, and he decided in 1942 that he wanted to operate on one of these craniofacial deformities. This girl from Portugal, we can't imagine why he was wanting to do that at the time, but it was a monumental failure. He could not do this because the brain gets in the way, you see. This brain is being squeezed. You can't move the face without interfering with the brain. And this was a failure. And I was privileged because the man who assisted him was a man called Harrison. He was a hand surgeon ultimately. I met him years and years later in Singapore and sat down in the Shangri-La Hotel and had afternoon tea while he told me the whole story of what a disaster that operation was. And that was one of the great moments in formulating my life, because along came this man, Paul Tessier, my surgical father, the founder of modern craniofacial surgery, and he had a friend called Gio, a couple of garrulous Frenchmen, you know, coffee and croissants like this, and smoking cigars. And sorry, it's a messy slide, but he said, look, we pull this back, we take the skull off, can you move the brain? And he said, pourquoi pas, why not? And that was exactly the... Have again? Is that it? Not working? There we are, pourquoi pas. And that became the logo for our international society. So, this is me, a long time ago, you can see. I went to Bristol, and Tessier hit the waves, you know. This surgery was being done. Some people said it was a crime, other people said it couldn't be done, blah, 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 and then everybody wanted to do it. So I thought this was pretty good and I'd like to do this. And so my chief said, go, get on the aeroplane, go to Paris. So it was arranged that three of us, another very well-known man called Ian Taylor, the one in the middle, the man who did the first free flaps in the world in Melbourne, and we went. And I wanted to go and see Tessier, which I did, you can see, to Paris. And then we went to see this man, Jaco Hager, who none of you would have heard of, but he was a political plastic surgeon who was trying to pull together everything in Europe to get people to work together, Jaco Hager. And ultimately, so we learned a bit from him, and then we went to see Tord Skog in Uppsala, a Swede, who was very, very famous particularly for cleft lips and palates. His successor came to Adelaide to train with me and went back to be the head of that unit, ultimately. So, and just, I can't resist this because Uppsala is one of the original universities in Europe, contemporaneous with Oxford, etc. And that is the vision outside his operating theatre. That is him in the centre. And you see the medieval castle and the medieval Christian cathedral. And it's just means a lot to me that was the culture that bred that sort of excellence. How are we going here? So now what I want to do a little bit is just focus on some people. This is Tessier and his wife Morel, and the theme of this is people. Things get achieved by people meeting people, and relationships. Slides changing very slowly. And so when I came back to Bristol, I was allowed to go all the time, come and go on the aeroplane to do what I could. And then I had to come back and tell them in Bristol, just in case they had a case to do. And they did get a case to do. Everybody in England wanted to get a case to do. They even got Tessier to come to London to do a case, and on television, the child died. In Bristol, this child died. I was the senior registrar. I knew more about it than anybody else. I was the person who went there, but there were other people who wanted to do the surgery. And they did the surgery and the child died. But they left it to me to speak to the parents. They left it to me to go to the post-mortem and see her there. And I never forgot that. So when I came back to Adelaide, moving on. Yeah, we'll go back a bit. Sorry, this is not working so easily. We started to do a few things. We wanted to do this. We wanted to get involved with some of this work. There were lots of facial smashes, no seat belts. If you sat in the death seat, you remember, in your Volkswagen, the death seat was your girlfriend's seat in the front seat. Take her to the dance, put your foot on the brake suddenly, and her head hit the metal front of the Volkswagen. Daily event in Adelaide. And we were trying to work out to bring the principles of craniofacial surgery to look after these people properly. It was a battle. Because it was not easy to cut across already established activities. Now, one day I was in the Northeastern Community Hospital taking a mole off of my hero at school, Pat Packpoy, head of Ross Trevor's everything. And Pat Packpoy was very in advisor to Don Dunstan. He said, "What are you doing, young David?" And I said, "Oh, I'm trying to do this stuff, you see." And he said, "Well, the chief would like to hear about that." Didn't hear anything else, and a couple of weeks later, I got summoned, "Come, Parliament House, today, now." I went there, and there was Don Banfield, the Minister of Health. He said to me, "Jesus, mate, what are you doing here? Am I in trouble?" And I said, "Well, I've just come." He said, "Well, I've been asked to come." Went in, Dunstan said, "Tell me about this craniofacial stuff." Told him about it. Took about 10 minutes. He turned around to Bruce Guerin, who was his advisor. They were all beautifully coiffed. They were beautifully turned out. And he said, "Bruce, we're going to do this. We're set up to do this. Ring the hospitals, would you? Adelaide Hospital, Children's Hospital. Fix it. No committees, no outsourcing, etc. Do it." By the time I got back to the Children's Hospital, whatever it was that hits the fan had hit the fan. "What the hell are you doing going up doing this and the other thing? You can't do this. Anyway, congratulations, we have to do it." and it was, that set the scene. The scene was that, yes, we did it, but there was always 100 people wanting to stop you. So anyway, that was the enlightenment of Dunstan, and we'll deal with a bit of that later on. We then formed the South Australian Craniofacial Unit, we had a team that you've heard lots about, and here are some of the players, and there's Nick Pines here. His dad was the first ophthalmologist in that team, and Peter Riley, and Bob Edwards, who's here, etc. Ian Wall is not there because he joined it just a few months later, and we had this multidisciplinary team that was really quite unique, because getting people to work together was not an easy thing. And I have to pay great honour, etc. this evening, particularly in the presence of Valda, who is here, who was Donald's great neurosurgical theatre sister, and her surname was Savage, and my God, she was. She had total loyalty to Donald, and she only reluctantly transferred some of that to me. But she was totally wonderful, and Donald was very good, because Donald was establishment and I was not. So Donald gave me a certain air of credibility that I would never have had, and I'm immensely grateful to him, not only for his expertise, his knowledge, his personality, his his wonderful reciting of Hilaire Belloc cautionary tales during surgery, and his friendship over the years, and I'm sad that he's not here anymore. And this is moving along a little bit. This is just a group of us, of the team, and you can see some of the people who are here tonight there. That's moving on several years. And just a little bit about the structure. We provided a national and international teaching, research and patient service when there was no one else in the country doing it. They had tried to do some cases in Sydney. They had brought a very admirable man called Donald Wood Smith, who I like very much, an expatriate Australian in New York, to come out and do some surgery. And it's a big message. You don't go and play football on somebody else's football field. Home games are very important. And they killed a couple of kids in Sydney. So we were then resurrecting this whole idea in Australia, and we'll get around to some of the things about that in a minute. How am I going? So we had a vision, and you hear a lot about doing surgery. People say, yeah, we do surgery, but listen, this is delivering health care to people who have craniofacial deformity. Some people don't need surgery. They don't need this big surgery, but they do need a management program from the time they're diagnosed in their mother's womb to the time they die. So it is a healthcare delivery thing. One of the big mistakes has been, oh, it's an operation. The operation's been done, goodbye. That's not it. So Don Dunstan will come up lots during this talk, and he is a man who had a vision. Some people hated him, some people loved him. He was an almighty leader. He was, in the old sense, and in the second part of this evening, I want to talk a little bit about the qualities that are needed to be able to deliver these sorts of programs in our community. But he had the intelligence and the moral integrity to one, see what was needed, and secondly, to see it through. Now, just think where we were. Tessier, my surgical father, this garrulous Frenchman, had been chucked into jail by the Nazis. He was a trauma surgeon. He was French. He didn't like Germans from that time. Sorry, Barbara, but he had a problem with it. But he was chucked into jail, and he ultimately came out and was non-establishment, and he created this in Paris. But he came into what, for those who understand what the term paradigm means, there had been a paradigm shift. If he had done that 10 years before, it wouldn't have fitted. But all of the dots had lined up. So there was a big need for this. And he wrote a paper. He came to Melbourne to an international college, International Society of Plastic Surgeons meeting in 1971. And he set out exactly how you should do this, what you needed. This is important. And the point I want to make before I even make it, as it were, is that we were the only, courtesy of Dunstan, courtesy of South Australia, we were the only people in the world who were able to put that whole program in place. Everywhere else who tried it, there was the brain surgeons didn't want it, or could only have half of it, or it was not right for America and it wasn't quite right for the British Health Service, so on and so forth. But we got the lot. And this is what we got. You needed one unit to 20 to 30 million people. We didn't have 20 to 30 million people in South Australia, but Don Dunstan had all the connections with Southeast Asia. Instantly, we had Malaysia, we had Singapore, and beyond. They were desperate for all of this work to be done. So we had our population. We had the most amazing experts in South Australia, people wanting to be able to do the science, do the work, do the thinking. And in the second part, I'll talk a little bit more about what is very special about us. So you think about this. In 1 week, this is what you have to do to be able to keep up your skills and to get good results. You have to do it all the time. The difficulty with plastic surgeons who wanted to do it, and I was one, is that you cannot make your living from silastic tits and bums for 2/3 of the week and look after little kids' brains, etc., for the rest of it. That is just not possible. You cannot bring the gravitas to this problem if it is a hobby and not full-time. So that, of course, causes a bit of a problem in the world as well. So we formulated 6 principles, and those 6 principles have been picked up around the world, published, and those units that have followed what we did here in Adelaide have all taken those principles into account. Now, I'm going to show you the first case we did. Valda had said, she was there, so Valda has said that we should do this. Now, the very first case was done in 1974, I think it was, about that time, and it was a boy from the Pacific Islands, and his name was John. I won't tell you his other name. He's changed it to Jean now because he wanted to be Frenchified a bit. But anyway, he forgive that photograph. That was him after some 15 or 16 hours of surgery, and all of those wire things on his were the way in which we fixed the faces for those nasty fractures that I told you about that occur on Saturday night from the front seat of the Volkswagen. And there he is a few days later, and there he is before and after. He's recovered, and there he is 44 years later, came back to see me. I see him in Sydney from time to time. So that's what you need. You need longitudinal management, and John has had a decent and full life from all of this. Now, when we did this, I was sitting in my and I have to tell this story because there's a very special young man here this evening who's the son of one of my patients who is in fact an Apexian. And Apexians have gone through a tough time recently because the youth of modern youth doesn't think very much about going out and giving service as much as it used to anyway. So there arrived in my office the cub reporter who reported for the news in those days on the racing. And he said, "We heard you did this surgery and we're going to print some of this on Saturday mornings, Friday." And I said, "Oh, they're sick in hospital, we're just worried, we don't know what's going to happen to this." He said, no, listen, mate, look, you know, I'm a reporter." He said, "You know, you either tell me about it or we make it up." And I kid you not, and he showed me a picture of a paper mache face from a circus, from a horror movie. He said, "No, that's the picture we're going to use." Anyway, so apart from the various expletives that I uttered at the time, I rang up the hospital and said, "What are we going to do?" And they got hold of a man called Barry Hailston. Anyone remember Barry Hailston? Yeah, he was the reporter, an honourable man. And Barry said, "Well, OK, we'll do a big story and cut it properly and cut it out." And we did. So Sunday morning in my house at Rostrevor, the door bell rang, and there were a couple of sort of dishevelled young men. And you know Adelaide's transport system is such that, you know, you can go out on a bus this way, and but if you want to go across the arc, top of the arc, it's a hell of a business in Adelaide to get anywhere then and now. And these couple of young Apexians had botted their way all the way from Salisbury out to my house, walked up Morialta Road, and they said, "We want to help." So the effect of that was that they did. They did everything they could. They couldn't do it all. They got the Rotary and the Lions who felt sorry for them. They raised $10,000, and we had our first office in the Children's Hospital. Up till that time, the head of the Children's Hospital was quite happy to obey Don Dunster, but give me a broom cupboard to work in. So that's how you worked in administration. That's how you pay off somebody who's gone above your head. Anyway, the broom cupboard disappeared, and we were given, paid for by the Apexians. We were given a proper office, and they went on from that day. A man called Jim Davis picked this up, and Jim Davis was part of our original foundation because they got every single Apex club in the whole of Australia. They made a video, they sent it to every single one, and they raised $1 million over a year for their special project. And that's the basis of our foundation. We decided not to spend it, but to use it as capital for the foundation that we have run, and all honour and glory to them. So anyway, let's talk about relationships a bit more, because this is my classmate, S.T. Lee, Sik Ting Lee, who became the head of plastic surgery in Singapore, and a very important man. And I say to any medical students now, indeed any university students, just be very nice to the person sitting next to you, because they might be the next Minister of Health for Bahrain or somewhere else. Just be careful and be polite and be nice. You never know to whom you are relating. You know, it's all right to say, stuff off, I don't like you. Be careful. This man was my friend. And this man was my friend because he and his mates got caught by the rector of Aquinas College gambling at night time, and I was at that stage the chairman of the students' committee or whatever it was. And so anyway, I made sure that they didn't get into any trouble. So we were always friends. So friends are important. So he facilitated our way into helping with Singapore, similarly with Malaysia, and we'll talk about Indonesia shortly. So we've seen this young man, so I won't go into it all, but you saw him on there. He came through Singapore, and the bit that you didn't see was something that talks about the broader team. He had that little kid with his terrible facial deformity had sat in the children's hospital while we were working him up, and he had no language, as you saw from the video. But after a while, the nurses noticed that he was speaking like Bugs Bunny, and he had been watching Bugs Bunny videos on the television, and that indicated that he had a huge brain. And the kids with these terrible facial deformities, I have noticed, and I have seen and treated more of them than any single person in the world, they all have huge potential. The children whose brains are squeezed are at risk. If we get them early enough, they're good. But the ones with facial clefts, etc., have very good brains. And this is just, and it was just on display, bingo, just like that. And he's the boy who you see is the manager of the hotel in Sarawak. Now, I'll just we'll go back just a shade with that. These are my Malaysian mates, multidisciplinary, orthodontist, oral surgeon, a couple of plastic surgeons, Surendra Nathan there in the back, and we were a long connection with Malaysia after the Second World War here in South Australia, academically and in every other way. So that was a very easy relationship. And you fast forward for a number of years, and this is one clinic in Singapore with what would be more than a lifetime's work for any other unit in the world. And I just want to, just for 1 second, focus on these two little people here. They're twins with Crouzon syndrome. And I've managed those since they were babies together, and both of them have graduated with master's degrees from Singapore universities, and we'll see a bit of them later on. Now, this is a slight aside, Bob. You recognise who that is, don't you? Yeah, this is, and the older people here will understand this. I won't tell you the name of this man, but he's an expatriate surgeon. And the other day we heard at the College of Surgeons about the famous anatomist Jack Last, who used to be the GP at Bullaroo Centre, who became the most famous anatomist in the College of Surgeons in London. And he had to leave because he had had a relationship with the matron of the hospital. And of course, in those days, you had to go and wander the world like the Flying Dutchman. You were never allowed to come home. You had to go and expiate your sin. Well, this was, days have changed, haven't they, a bit, don't you think? So anyway, this man suffered a similar fate, and he wound up in Brunei. And in those days it was a protectorate, and a British protectorate, and they had, as you know, the Sultan of Brunei is a very rich man, and the Sultan of Brunei engaged us to go and set up his cleft lip and palate service over the years, and we went for 9 consecutive years there and saw its transition into an independent country. There are lots of stories. You may pick up some of them by looking around at the posters. So you needed political facilitation for the whole of this business, and that's here I can show you the picture here of early on with the Director General of Health in Malaysia, Tan Sri Khalid, our High Commissioner, and yours truly. And on the other side over here, and you'll see Basil Hetzel there, but also our federal, our national NIDS, or they're not the NIDS, the Foreign Affairs people, anyway, that lot. They're there, and they're having a conference here in Adelaide, particularly centred around the work that we were doing, because we were facilitating access to various Southeast Asian countries. And this just shows you, within a very short period of time, we were providing services to all of those cities in Malaysia. We were sending teams there. We even incorporated our colleagues from interstate into the various teams, providing they adhered to our... Evening, Eugene, how are you? They adhered to our principles. And you can see where Brunei is, can't you, here? I'm not mastering this thing at all. There, that's Brunei, the little green bit. They fitted very well into this whole program. So why did we need to do this? Why did anybody need to do this sort of thing for people? Well, sitting around, you imagine nobody's doing it. Nobody's doing this for anybody. And this girl is a very good example. You've arrived just in time, Eugene, because this is one of your triumphs. That's Eugene Tan, the world's best microsurgeon ever, and I kid you not. And Eugene and I went for about 20 hours on this girl, I think. Somebody had attempted, she had no jaw on one side. Somebody had attempted to put a bit of her toe bone into her, and that hadn't worked. Someone else had tried to put a bit of metal, and that hadn't worked. But anyway, Eugene was one of the first of the microsurgeons, and you'll see we planned this meticulously in a way that didn't involve computers. And that's the surgery, taking some of her hip, etc., and some of the fat from her groin, etc. There she is after the surgery, and there she is with her baby. This is what we planned. You know, this is how we had to operate in those days, not only on new cases, but with lots of people in the background. There were some that we couldn't treat. This poor little lady with in the red here, this one here, who had been locked up in a madhouse in Melbourne, and she had been thought to, she was one of those, you cannot do this business without knowing the sociology of being. When a Catholic married a Protestant and the parents disagreed and the first baby looked like this, that was the Lord coming down upon you. And so they took the baby and put her in a madhouse. But in fact, one of the people in the madhouse recognised after many years that this little person actually had a brain, that she was doing little things. She'd never been taught anything, but she was actually doing things. She tried to come out and have some surgery, etc. In fact, the craniofacial surgery didn't fail. She wound up having a cardiothoracic problem and died. And the other girl was one of the many people who were just locked up. This particular girl locked up in the outback lavatory when the parents wanted to go out. So, you know, there are stories writ large about this sort of thing. And this particular girl was very important because she was a patient of Donald Simpson's, my wonderful neurosurgical colleague. And she had made a decision to take a risk. No one in the world with this condition had ever had a baby. And she decided to try. She became a farmer's wife from the southeast of South Australia, and she got lucky. There are her two kids. And she wanted her face and forehead to look better, so we pulled all of that forwards, etc. And it's her genetics that enabled us, plus the Oxford group, to discover the gene for APES. It was her material that made that possible. So I'm going to very quickly go through some of the clinical things that, you know, before and after pictures type stuff, but only a little bit. They're the list of problems that we dealt with, and that's the story. You see, somebody from birth to maturity, and there she is with her PhD. And this girl with APES, that was considered to be 100% failure, no good at all, they'll never make it. That girl drives her own car, and I think I've got one here. Look, there she is as a middle-aged lady. So, you know, she's had a full and complete life. And then we have the normal ones, but these kids even were not done to a high standard. They were not truly multidisciplinary managed. And you can see that you can get spectacular results. Because of the Indonesian connection and the Malaysian connection, we were able to put together the greatest collection and management programs for these children with the rare craniofacial clefts. Tessier had wanted to see one of these girls, like this girl, number 10 cleft. Nobody had ever seen it. He postulated that it should be there. This girl is from Hong Kong. And as I tell you, she is a senior bank teller in one of the senior Hong Kong banks. You see, the brain. And so on and so forth. It is how you turn out in the end and what your life can possibly be like. And again, a tribute to Eugene, because this operation was performed on an Indonesian boy from Surabaya, and that's at one operation in Adelaide. And that is he's mature, he's got the established deformity, and that was done one-off. And then you have the simpler things that we do, and once again, the maturity, you need to look at the longitudinal business. This girl suffers from a withering face syndrome. Their face just rots away with time, and you can see the difficult thing here, that picture there, is she's 19 and she's a medical student, and That's her wedding after, again, Eugene Tan's wonderful work. And then she becomes an older lady. And then ultimately, she is the head of gynecology in the Busan Women's and Children's Hospital in South Korea. Trauma, I've told you all about that. This lady is a very well-known country and western singer and who smashed her face in the way I've described. And this common disease in Southeast Asia, not so common in Australia. This is a nice Aboriginal girl from the Kimberley, and that's a bit of the brain coming out onto the forehead. And we did a lot of original work on that together with our Thai colleagues, and helped, Donald Simpson in particular, helped to understand the pathology of this. So there we are. That's the spread of our the extent of our influence in Southeast Asia and indeed the Gulf, because they became very interested in our work. Over that period of time, we sent teams there, we trained people in all of those countries, etc. And it's worth mentioning, well, I'll mention it a little later on, about where our trainees went and what they did. So we ran 2 international workshops. In 1986, we decided these rare clefts needed some special attention. So we were able to do this in Adelaide and bring all of the world's experts, my craniofacial colleagues. There were 18 of us who formed the International Society in the early 80s. And we were able to bring them to Adelaide, and we were able to discuss this at the Hilton Hotel for a week and to demonstrate surgery. These days, occupational health, safety and all the rules wouldn't allow you to do it. But they all became registered, they all came here, and they all demonstrated. And then it was so good, they had never seen that before. Not New York, not London, nowhere. Nobody had done it, we did it. And then 2 years later, by popular assent, we did it all over again for trauma. And we produced every single type of craniofacial traumatic case that you could have, and all of those people analysed them, participated in the assessment and selectively operated on them. We had the central, like the footy, we had the central Channel 7 and ABC at the Adelaide Oval. We did it from there, and we had the outreaches in the various hospitals, and we had an audience and discussed the cases as they were going on. So that was an extraordinary educational activity. We formed the International Society of Craniofacial Surgeons, and they're the founding members, and there was our first meeting. And the name craniofacial has now been accepted. It was people want to battle over it because it meant these sort of silos having to readjust who they were. But and what we have done out of Adelaide, the International Society of Craniofacial Surgeons, I was an original in that and represented this region, and then I was privileged to be able to form the Asian Pacific Craniofacial Society. Not easy, because we had to deal with 2 Chinas, you know. So, but we did. And then we formed an Australasian society as well. And we formed the concept of having international, regional and national societies, and that is the network that now exists. And at one stage, all of that was being run out of Adelaide. And now some personalities. Well, that's Tessier. On his left is Daniel Marchak, who was another great French craniofacial surgeon. And the girl in the pearls is Valerie Munro, my friend and colleague Ian Munro's wife. And there they are at the very first meeting in Lana Pool when we formed our society. And there we are a couple of years later. And the man in the white suit is Fernando Ortiz Monasterio, who was also wonderfully famous Mexican. who was also an Olympic gold medalist for yachting and all sorts of other things. Anything that anyone ever did in the world, Fernando could do it better than anyone. So fast forward to 2005, and there, when I was president and we had our meeting in Queensland, that's a group of the people who were actually trained here in Adelaide, who come from around the world. They're not all of them, but there are significant numbers of them. And we will speak of, that's the man who went back to be the head of Great Ormond Street in London. That is the man who set up the Craniofacial Unit in Chulalongkorn in Bangkok. This is the man who is currently head of the unit in Oxford, and so on and so on. So as far as education is concerned, well, there are some of the fellows that have trained with us and have become specially trained in craniofacial surgery and gone out around the world to set up their own units. You would have seen the lady in red there, you would have seen on the video, because she's the surgeon prima donna in Surabaya. The Surabaya unit, which deals with some 260 million people around the place. There are other units in Indonesia, but that's the premier one. The two prime surgeons there are females, and both trained by us. And here's just a whole list of people from around the world. You can look at us. There's India, there's Singapore, there's Colombia, there's Thailand, Switzerland, and the Middle East, etc., and Sweden. And this, I think, is one of the points that we should grasp. One of the very interesting and positive things. People would say, well, why you? Well, my friend, S.T. Lee, you know, Singapore's an aggressive place at marketing itself. And they said, we want to do this. Come on, So when we came to the education, their ministers would get hold of somebody. It was at Stanford. They got hold of someone in Stanford. They're going to have the telelinks with Stanford. So, okay, don't want to have a telelink with you in Adelaide. Yeah, we know that, we know. So, but Stanford's really good. So they had to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to speak to Stanford, of course. And so nobody could do anything with Stanford. And that fell over in 10 minutes because this is the issue here. The issue is that we are in an enormously time zone friendly situation. And when you take that time zone north-south, the greatest propensity of craniofacial deformity and sickness is in that area. So that's where your international group of people need to be focused. A little bit over towards India, but you then have this huge amount of pathology. So we did telemedicine a long time ago, and we still do it now, and you saw that on the promo. With this formal education, we established the first and only, and it has fallen into disarray at the moment because the university changed to an undergraduate university, but it's resurrectable at any time, a way of training people, particularly in craniofacial surgery, with a master's degree, particularly advanced. And that was done with Macquarie University. So you could include, and we are inclusive about this, the experts from dentistry, the oral and maxillofacial surgeons, the experts from ENT, the experts from brain surgery, all can join a proper educational program, and no one saying I'm better than somebody else, everybody taking modules from it so that they all get the best out of it. And that's how that was set up. Here's somebody I know. Can you see yourself? So this is this is Bruce Arthur, who was the doctor in the Jakarta embassy, and he and his wife were great supporters, and that's where our outreach clinic in Jakarta originally was. And here is the opening of the Yayasan Senyum clinic, right next to, on a block of land next to Sangla Hospital in Bali, acquired by the efforts of this lady, sorry, I'll go back again, Mary Northmore, there she is with Bronwyn, and that she got an OBE from our current king for her work there and our work there, and a Dutch donor joined in with something like 1 or 2 million euros to facilitate that. That's just one clinic in the morning in Bali, and you can see almost every facial deformity you've ever thought of there. And that is Didier, and she is the other Surabaya surgeon, and she's doing the surgery, and we're helping her out there. Now, Bob, this is a tribute to you. This is, you see, Bob Edwards is looking very worried there, and he has right to be. This little baby is not breathing very well, and you can see written on Bob's face, and I'm deeply indebted to his expertise and friendship, and I'm pleased to see him here tonight. The anxiety and care that goes with keeping that child alive. And here are some other people as well. Ian Wall, looking only slightly younger than he does now. There, and Jim Trott, and the team here again in Malaysia, and there, well done, Wall. Ian, do you remember this? This is Moses. Moses, who was brought across Borneo and arrived when we were doing a clinic and died. And very quickly, Ian was able to get into his bag, get out a tube, and on the nearest table, intubated Moses, and Moses lived. Then we treated Moses. Bing, 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 bing. And would you believe it? There he is now. Now, Moses needs another operation. Moses now needs the second stage, his face being brought forward, and that has not been done for one reason or another. Dr. Omori, he's a shogun. He's the head of everything in Japan, and his father was head of everything in Japan. And would you believe it, he plays golf. He plays golf so endlessly that nothing else matters. And we were having a reception at Government House by our then governor, and we're waiting to go to dinner. No Omori. This is the Asian Pacific Society, the heads of the units. We're waiting. And the governors and the staff are looking anxious. Eventually Omori arrives, and Omori's had a bit too much to drink. He's been on the 19th hole, as they say. So he comes in, he sits at dinner straight opposite the governor. He, me, the governor here, long table, as those of you who've been there know. And the governor is being extremely calm and nice and thing. And anyway, Omori is having great trouble and ultimately falls into his soup. And this is if anybody ever wants to learn about how to be governor of South Australia, then they need to see this, of course, because this the governor did not bat an eyelid. It was as though nothing had happened. The soup was cleaned, a napkin was given, etc. And a somewhat shamefaced Omori decided that it never existed either, and the whole evening just went on. There's a lot to learn from that. Ultimately, they dressed me up like this to give me some honour, together with a wonderful oral and maxillofacial surgeon from Germany called Carsten Gundlach. And there's other stories about Carsten, and I can't go into those, otherwise various members of my family will tick me off for telling too many stories. But anyway, there are some of our Japanese trainees, and they're very, very loyal and very excellent colleagues. Charan Marat, who I've highlighted before, became the head of the Craniofacial Unit at Chulalongkorn in Bangkok, and that runs beautifully. It is an excellent national unit. They made me an honorary member of their College of Surgeons at some stage. Now, Professor Tasman Brown, who can't be here tonight, he's not well, but he was one of the most outstanding sort of medical scientists, dental scientists in South Australia. He was 100% behind our work. He was able to give enormous positive, have an enormous positive influence on everything that we did, scientific and clinical. There he is with some of his proteges who were indispensable, Dr. Netherway and Dr. Abbott, and all had part of the development of the three-dimensional imaging. So science, teaching, education, etc., lots of things we did. We even developed our own titanium industry in South Australia. You know, a lot of titanium is actually mined here, and titanium, the metallurgy was actually done at the former School of Mines here, shipped to Japan, refined in Japan, shipped to Germany, made into plates and screws, and shipped back to us to charge you $1,000 for an osseointegrated implant in your tooth. So just think about that. We have our own plates and screws, which came out of the work of the Craniofacial Unit and its science. Then you've got all the wonderful research you've heard of, and we have some of our researchers here tonight, both genetic and clinical, and also the research into modelling, and also the research into measurement, and the clinical research, which is only able to be to exist if you have longitudinal databases. I put that up there just to show you the twins again. There's one of them coming out at her graduation, and it's just that there's a journey, and so I just want to make some very short comments about a couple of the outreach clinics that we run. Not all of them. The rest of them I encourage you in a minute to have a look at when you have a drink and a nibble. Nasendoscopy, which is the way in which you assess speech, was highly developed here in South Australia, following on my education in Bristol by a man called Ron Piggott, who invented this for cleft lip and palate. And here we are in Pantai Hospital, Ian will remember this, in Kuala Lumpur, because you could not get the sophistication into the huge big Hospital Bazaar, which is just, it was just too big, they were too busy, too many people dying of cancer and being smashed on the roads. So the Mahatia's family owned this hospital in Petaling, very chic hospital. And they agreed to let us set up a cleft lip and palate clinic there with all of the people necessary, but that they would allow everybody into it. And so we had to educate these people in all the aspects orthodontics, speech therapy, as well as the surgery, etc. And there we are, doing some surgical education. And the leader there was a man called Dr. Kim Tan. And here is Dr. Michael Nugent, well-known man, I'm sure, in this room. And he's up there teaching away. And we needed speech therapists. So there are 3 languages, 3 official racial groups in Malaysia: Chinese, Malay and Indian. So you need to train the speech pathologists in 3 separate languages. And so I have to pay tribute tonight, I don't have a picture of her, to Alison Bagnall, who went and trained these people. Alison was one of the world's best speech pathologists. I first knew of her when I was in Bristol as the senior registrar. When I came to go back to Adelaide, the head of speech therapy, as it was then, in the West Country said, "This girl," and she gritted her teeth, "has married an engineer and is going back to a place near you called Whyalla." and she said, "This girl was the best person we've ever trained in this country. You must contact her, and if she gets an opportunity to get out of Whyalla, you must help her." So almost shortly after I got back, she had contrived to manipulate her husband to have a job in Adelaide, having spent a few months in Whyalla. Anyway, Alison was a brain like you have never come across before. And she gave truth to the fact that bumptious surgeons like me have to listen to other people. It may be good at this, but other people are very good at something else. And she was good at something else. And she brought a whole new dimension to speech pathology. And when she got a Churchill Fellowship, and she and I went to a very big American meeting, and she had to rub shoulders with Sally Peterson Falzone and Betty Jane Williams, the harpies of American speech pathology. She held her own and dominated, and she was absolutely wonderful. She's dead now, and I really miss her because she was very difficult to get on with, mind you, but she was utterly wonderful. And she trained these 3 girls in the 3 languages to service that clinic. So there we are, right up to date for a few years ago, still working with our foreign affairs people at the University Science Malaysia, working up programs. I need to say something about China before we break for there you are, Bob. That's the signing of the MOU with Dr. Cixing Chang. Please look at the China poster, because Cixing Chang, that dear old man on my left there, was one of Mao Zedong's doctors on the Long March. He was in fact a medical student, but they make no distinction between medical students, people who dig in the fields, and doctors. But he was there, and he had a station for the marches, and he organised for us to go there. They wanted us, and then they came here for many years, and we still, until quite recently, had a very strong relationship with them. And here we are on our first visit, and you can see a very young Peter Riley in the front row, and you can see my daughter Esther with the pink skirt on, and you can see it's dotted around. There are members of the People's Liberation Army there, kept an eye on everybody all the time. And here we are as much older men. He died at 99.9. He didn't make 100. And he used to say, "Eye still sharp, hand still steady." And he always used to greet me with that sort of greeting. So, and we had a lot of relationships, trade relationships, political relationships, things that we did for our government at the behest of our government. And this is a trade exchange. Again, there's Peter Riley, I can see him twice. That's Dr. Mu, who is Professor Chang's successor. And would you believe it that the trade delegation got out some things and played cricket outside? So, yeah. And this relationship's continued on, where we get invited to very important events like the Japanese-Chinese craniofacial plastic surgical joint meetings would include us. And that's they're the places that we had influence on, have trained people in China. I just wanted to, for 1 second, to say that as a result of all of that, a number of years ago, I was approached by the British government to join a scoping mission with some pretty high-powered people, because the Chinese Central Committee had approached the British government to set up primary health care. They don't have primary health care. It's a Russian model. They never had GPs. So they put together a flash team of healthcare people, but they had nobody who could look at an operating theatre and see whether it worked or not, whether it was functional, what sort of an operating theatre was, one, there, and two, what you needed. So I was asked if I would go along with this team, and I did, and it was an extraordinary experience, because we went, courtesy of the Chinese Communist Party, everywhere, got access to the whole matrix of healthcare throughout the whole of China over several weeks. I saw every type of healthcare facility that had anything to do with delivery of anything in that area, and it was an amazing experience and gave me a profound understanding of one aspect of how that system works. And that was a privilege that came out of the idea of the relationship, again, people to people. The fact that Chang and I got on well. I would like you to look at the poster, because there's some hilarious stuff occurred when the Chinese came to Adelaide. You can't imagine. And Valda will remember that the beautiful nurse that came with them, who of course always was going to stay in Australia, and she did. She had her eye on several people. One of my surgical colleagues was the first one, but she eventually got the appropriate. Did she? Well, congratulations. Well, has she produced another generation? Very good. Miss Mao, her name was, appropriately. So anyway, then there was Indonesia, and this is a latter-day photograph from when Bill Farmer was the ambassador. But we had a long relationship, which is still going with Indonesia, and it started because at a plastic surgical meeting in Bali, I was approached by a man called Diwio Segundo. And Diwio Segundo was the medical director of the Rumah Sakit Anak and Bersalin Harapan Kita, which was the first ladies' hospital. And he was a military man, Air Force. And he wanted me to come to teach them craniofacial surgery, because nothing ever happens in the military, and no submarines ever get lost, and we have no problems. But if you would just teach us something about how to fix up these faces and these heads and identify maybe what's happened to somebody's skull, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, our government thought this was a good idea, and we went with full diplomatic support everywhere to be able to establish the relationship with Indonesia at a time when it was very fractious. They did not like us. We were essentially at Cold War with them. And we managed that through to this day. That has been a very successful relationship. And you saw us teaching our colleagues, the 215 on the video. And here we have that girl in the green top is the daughter of the director of the hospital in Bali. And that's her baby. And she has had major surgery done by us. And there's Bronwyn, and that's Brett. And Brett is our man. He is the Consul General in Bali at the time. And that's at the opening of the burns unit donated by the Howard government after the Bali bombing. And we were the only Australians there, but Megawati was there, and very big presence. And the reason for this is that when we looked around, we found that this beautiful operating theatre had not been commissioned. Everything was donated by the Lions and the Tigers and the Rotary, and everybody from everywhere. It was all wrapped up in plastic. So Bronwyn and David Barker, who was the anaesthetist who was with us, we commissioned that hospital. And we made sure that the oxygen was connected. Bob knows about that. He knows that you've got to connect the right tubes to the right outlets, and all of the instruments and everything else. And when that was done, that director of that hospital then allowed us to operate on his daughter. And we did that to demonstrate that it was all tickety-boo. So we performed various, that's just one of the small stories that goes with all of that. And this is, we went for a holiday last year to the Kimberley, and we went out fishing. And the guy who took us fishing started to speak Bahasa. Selamat pagi, okay. So, and I said, Selamat pagi. He said, oh, you know, but so anyway, he comes from Bali. He's an expat Australian who runs a surf business up there. And what happened was that COVID came, and COVID stuffed up his surf business. So he comes down to the Kimberley to help take people out fishing, etc., from the cruise ship. And he's telling me, we got chatting. And I hope you're listening, Wal, because he says, look, you know, I learned everything up there. He said, I got this great mate. He taught me everything I know. He said, geez, he's a rough guy, this guy. He's just like Crocodile Dundee. And he said, you know, one day, he said, he used to ride this bike. And he said he used to drink a bit of stuff. He said, ride his bike off the edge of the cliff and over. He said, bingo, and he wound up in a tree. He said, and so I said, oh yeah. And I said, yeah, well, I know who that is. I said, I and my anaesthetist, Ian Wall, were people who fetched him out of the tree. So we were asked, one of our, that's not quite true, what we had to view him in hospital because when this sort of thing happened and there was something to see, we were first cab off the rank to go to the hospital to sort out the problems that the Consul General had to sort out for expatriate Australians. And that was one of them. He got on his mobile phone and rang this guy up straight away to tell him that he'd met me. So anyway, just a short story. The foundation, you've heard all about the foundation. We formed the foundation, and that's been a howling success. This is the beginning of the Asian Pacific Craniofacial Association. Alexander Downer, you'll recognise. But I put that up here because of this. That person, Valda, that's David Hemme and Gail. Now, when we wrote a book on craniofacial surgery in 1981, Donald Simpson wanted to go to Oxford to write his bit because he loved Oxford. So he went to Oxford. And we needed a neurosurgeon. So David Hemme, this wonderful American who'd married an Australian girl, a nurse, they'd been in Vietnam, they'd met Donald, he came out to Australia, and did he revolutionise it a bit, Valda? He did. Yes, he brought a whole new breath of fresh air to the neurosurgical community in Adelaide, and he remained a lifelong friend. And I'll maybe later, if I've got time, tell you a story about how he brought the whole concept. I'll tell you now. One day he came in. He said, "I've just had a call from General Electric." He was military. He was and he said, "Here is a vision that they sent through of a cervical vertebrae. It's a three-dimensional image. What do you think we could do with that? So could we make a skull?" He said, "Well, why not? Well, let's ask." So we got on the phone straight away, through to this fellow at General Electric in Seattle, or no, maybe was it Milwaukee, and the fellow said, "Yeah, well, the algorithm, dear chap, you can't speak to me. The algorithm has been written in Philadelphia by one of these expatriate Jews from Hungary, 56 revolution." He said, Gabor Herman's his name. "I'll give you a number." So then get on the phone, you ring up, and I met this man later, beard like this, 6'6", beard. He says, "What, you come from Adelaide?" "We're Adelaide." He said, "You want algorithm for the three-dimensional thing?" He said, "You're so stupid." He said, "You're stupid." He said, "You are 200 metres away from the man." He said, "It's my teacher, George Sved. He invented this algorithm. He's in your university. And in fact, he's the father of one of my classmates." Huh? The algorithm for three-dimensional skulls and anything else was written by George Sved, and we do not have enough money to be able to... We did the first ones here. And ultimately, all of that goes back to General Electric, Siemens, and everybody. Now you can do it on your phone. And so that's where that wound up. So the Australian Association, Asian Pacific Association, I just want to say one thing here, that this is their meeting in 2000, and it's important to see that here is Chang here, and sitting next to him is the representative from Taiwan. So we managed to get them ultimately around the table to form the society. They are both close friends of mine. Now, you can't have a drink before I tell you a bit about this. Kathy, where's Kathy? There you go. Kathy and Bob. Peter's not here tonight, Peter? No. Peter Riley was there for a bit as well. We were asked, this group of people arrived in my office, and they came unshaven, demanding that I come to help them with the martyrs in Iran after the Iran-Iraq war. They said, "We have these people, the young people, the hands blown off, faces blown, they went across in front of the tanks and that sort of thing." So I rang Foreign Affairs. Foreign Affairs says, "We desperately want you to go." Australia is the only remnant of the West there. We represent everybody. And you've all seen the film Argo, I expect. Most people have seen the film Argo. Yeah. So the Americans were kicked out, everybody was kicked out, nobody's there. And so we'll look after you. So I go twice to see what there is there. And then we take a team. Ultimately, they are going to bring some of the martyrs back. And Calvary Hospital nurses here. St Anne's at Calvary turned over the nurses' home for the martyrs to come and be done here. Our ASIO people used to have people in Barnard Street with guns to make sure everything was okay. And anyway, we ultimately did what we had to do there, and there's lots of stories about that. But on the day that we were to come home, the Ayatollah died. And the streets were empty, the Revolutionary Guards were out, the guns were on the back of the four-wheel drives, and the ambassador said, "Come quickly to my house." And the troops, we had troops up on the Iran-Iraq border, will come down as well. We couldn't get there. Our host, who was a decent man, an Ayatollah himself, Saeed Amami, sends me Christmas cards each year. He took us out on the streets. He said, "We best go and try and get to the airport." Anyway, we managed to get to the airport, a frightening experience. Poor Kathy had to endure getting through and searched, etc. And we managed to get there, and we managed ultimately, in a scary way, to be driven out to the aeroplane, which wouldn't come in, and we got out. Prior to that, Bob and I had to go and collect our money, that were the payment for us being there. And as we were walking across the square away from it, Bob said to me, and we had this conversation, he said, "I think they're going to kill us." He said, "I think they're going to shoot us and say we're taking the revolution's money," and etc. And what was it, about 50 metres we had to walk further? It was the most terrifying 50 metres you could imagine. Anyway, we got out, as you can see. So on that sort of, we need to pay tribute to this man, Michael Landale, who was our most wonderful ambassador, and since dead. He wanted to get into politics, and would you believe it, didn't get pre-selection because a used car dealer got the pre-selection instead. Anyway, that's another story. Do have a cup of tea or something.